Good morning, friends. This week I learnt a new word, and the word's up on the screen, manifold. It's a word that I'd heard before. I knew it had something to do with cars, but it was one of those words that I had never really sat with. And I noticed that it appears a lot in Scripture if you go into the older translations. And this is going to be our landing point this morning. There's a little verse in 1 Peter chapter 4, and it speaks about the manifold grace of God. And there's a very important invitation, there's a very important call that's connected with this phrase, which is where we'll land this morning. But manifold simply means a chamber or a vessel which has lots of openings because there's a lot going on. Stuff needs to get in and out. And God's grace is like that. God's grace can be discovered in every season, if we have eyes in every moment, in every colour. And God is God. So big, so dynamic that we never get to the end of just how amazing grace is. Hence the hymn, Amazing Grace. And I guess I just want to name that my best sense of us in this season, this year through next year, is we're going to learn a lot about God's manifold grace. God is not just wanting to do one thing, one colour. There's a weave that's happening. And there isn't just one kind of person here who has one kind of experience of God. There's a weave that's happening. And so on the one hand, I'm a little bit apologetic that we're starting to mix some metaphors and layer some stuff together, but my sense is actually that's what we're being invited into. And so I want to start this morning just by doing a little bit of consolidation because we've introduced a lot of stuff the last couple of weeks. But it's all to do with this idea of grace being so amazing, so manifold, that there's lots of dimensions. A couple of weeks ago, on the 21st of June, so 3 weeks ago, we introduced a metaphor, which is actually behind me, which is picturing our community. And then over the last 2 weeks, we've had a second kind of master metaphor going. And I just want to go back and revisit those and kind of build on them this morning. This is a picture, an interactive picture of who we have been and who we are at our best at Ringwood Church of Christ. And the language of a tapestry of love is actually borrowed from Paul when he's writing to the little church in Colossae, the Colossians. He's saying, guys, let's become this tapestry of love together. And in the way that we've been using it, when it was constructed, before we added all of our extra pieces, there were 3 primary colours, the kind of the pillars, our true north, as it were. And if you go through our history over the whole journey, we've been a community that seeks to do a couple of things really well: to love God, to love people, and to love the world. And in the last decade or so, Kay really popularised the language of formation, community, mission, seeking to communicate these ideas. And then in more recent times, I've been suggesting actually true, kind and brave is the same kind of language, being true to the best we know of who God is and who we are, being kind in every relationship, and being brave enough to love the world as God so loved the world. And so that's a sort of a master metaphor, and it's going to be there as a kind of a trellis. It's a frame. It's not dictating what gets planted in front of it. It's just simply holding the growth. And part of our discernment is we each carry this. We each contribute to this. in our own way, and a number of you have been really quite intentional around, I wonder what colour I am. I wonder what my gift is. And maybe even recognising that some things that we used to carry are not as much in the foreground now, and there's some new things bubbling up. And I just encourage us into that space. There's just going to be an ongoing picture of what our community is about, of what it means to participate in this community. If that first one is like big picture, Ringwood as a whole, the second metaphor that Mark last week and me the week before were talking about is really about this season. So within the whole arc, we've got this tapestry of love metaphor. For this particular season, we're talking about rhythms of grace. And I told a story to introduce this idea of Celtic Christians and how they understood their call, their purpose, their particular contribution. And there's a story that goes of a Celtic Christian who's going about their daily life. They're out in the field, they're out in the village, and they're not that far from the Celtic monastery nearby. And as they're going about their day, all of a sudden they hear the bell. And they stop in their tracks and they recognise the sound. They recognise the beauty, the resonance of the bell. The call to remember, as Ken's talked about. The call to go deep, the call to pray, the call to be true to a rich tradition. And they say to themselves and they say to God, Lord, that is the most beautiful sound in the world. And then we're told as they're about to turn and actually head into the monastery to pray, they hear a second sound from the other direction, at the edge of the forest, a bird song, a bird singing a new, fresh song. And in that moment, they hear an invitation to wonder, to lean, to be curious, to be brave somehow, to lean into what's new and what's next. And they say to themselves and to God, Lord, that is the most beautiful sound in the world. And then that's the story. It's not resolved any further. The implication is that for the Celtic Christians, there was this ongoing conversation between bell and bird, wanting to honour, to listen, to remember, to resonate with the best of the tradition, the best of what previous generations had handed to them. But then also this recognition that I and we are to take our place in listening to God's Spirit, in what's being sung into being. And at their best, these two are in conversation with one another. They harmonise. They resonate with one another. And I desire to be part of an adventure with you guys. The next 18 months, we're listening to the bird and we're landing something that's of so much value that future generations have incorporated it into their bell, if that makes sense. And so there's a timeliness, I think, about the season that we're in. And so to try and ground this idea more and link it scripturally, we've picked on two passages which talk about standing and talk about standing in a way that leads to rest for our souls. And if you look through all of Scripture, there's only two verses that have this beautiful phrase, and you'll find rest for your souls. There's Jeremiah chapter 6, which is on the screen, and this beautiful passage about standing at the crossroads. But in a particular way, there's a call to ask for the ancient ways. This is very much a bell kind of passage. Okay, we've ended up at a crossroads, but how did we get here? How did we get here? What have we learnt? Who are we? It's not as though we're just teleported in. We've actually ended up here for all sorts of reasons. Let's be attentive to the good way, be attentive to what God has been teaching us. And so that's very much the bell passage. But then Jesus takes this language, intentionally takes this language, and in the middle of the Gospels, he says, hey guys, stand with me in my yoke. And the inference is to look and ask of Jesus where that good way is. And it has this beautiful dynamic of being much more like the bird. I don't know if you've thought about this, and I loved Ken's reflections this morning about the Gospels, but pretty much every person who encountered Jesus, one of the first words they heard was follow. And there's an implication in that. Jesus is a moving target. Jesus is going about his Father's business, and it's ending up taking all sorts of different forms and expressions. And if you want to be with Jesus, you have to be prepared to stay in step with Jesus. It's moving, it's ongoing, it's unfolding. It's an adventure. And so there's this beautiful phrase which we've been drawing on, learning the unforced rhythms of grace. And within Scripture, there's such a beauty to the way that time is experienced. And you might remember we've talked about this previously. There are two Greek words for time. There's chronos time, which is where we get the word chronology from, and it's tick-tock time. It's calendar years, it's financial years, it's this sense of time is ticking. And sometimes we have a relationship to time, if we emphasise that too much, where time becomes a bit of a boss. Sometimes a bit of a captor, we become a bit captive to time, we become a bit anxious about time. But then there's this second sense in Scripture of time being opportune, and it's the word kairos in Greek. Kairos time is that opportune time, how there is a particular season for each thing. And so when, right at the start of Scripture, God creates in 6 days and rests on the seventh and says, hey guys, hey creation, let's have a grace rhythm here. Let's have Sabbath. Or when you bundle all of that together, every 7 Sabbaths you get a Jubilee year. These are grace rhythms. And so the suggestion has been that we enter into a Jubilee season of just gently laying over the top of our tick-tock time this intentional sense of journeying through themes together. And with a large dose of humility, I've suggested the first and the last of our themes, starting with the word stand and finishing with the word rest, as these two key passages suggest. But part of our journey, part of our adventure, is that our different ministry teams, our elders, our staff, others, you will contribute over this journey to naming, to shaping what this journey is like, what it's about, what our key words are, key themes are that are bubbling up. And I know for some of us, it's like, oh, that's a little bit unusual, not having this concrete landed plan all the time. But I think this is part of the curiosity piece. Is I don't know what your experience of life is like with God, but God tends to operate with me on a need-to-know basis. And what I think I need to know is often greater than what God gives me. But there's often a very clear sense of being held somehow and being invited somehow. And in this kind of framework, we know a destination, we can kind of see a horizon. But it might be a bit of a meandering journey. There might be some beautiful contours. There might be lots of aspects of God's manifold grace that we're invited to learn. During the song, aptly titled Gratitude, I like that. I hope when you look at the picture on the front, you don't get too freaked out by the anatomical nature of it. But I would invite you to see the tapestry colours in that image. As I kind of hold it up, there is a sense in which this poem that's attached is effectively an echo of so many passages of Scripture where it talks about how we have a body, and in that metaphor we understand that there are all these different bits of our body that are woven together. And that the passage that Ken and Julie read for us this morning is one of at least a dozen passages in the New Testament that refer to God's people, God's church, community, as being like a body. And so, I hope you have that sense of tapestry. But then also you will see the little bell and bird on there. You'll see the little Jubilee icon that we've put together. And it's that sense of actually we're at the start of our Jubilee rhythm. And we're actually standing, we're now in the adventure already. And it's unfurling and it's unfolding. Before I unpack just an aspect of the poem that's there, I wanted to add a third conversation today. So we've talked about our community, the tapestry, and our season, the unforced rhythm of grace, the Jubilee rhythm. But I think within all of this, there is a particular calling for each one of us, for each part, for each member of the body. And I just invite us for a moment to consider this language from 1 Peter 4. Earlier this year when I had some conversation with our eldership, and I was seeking to get a sense of, Lord, are you tapping me on the shoulder? Are you drawing me to this opportunity to be an intentional senior minister here? The verse that kept bubbling up for me is this verse. And it says that each one of you should exercise whatever gift you have received to serve others. But that word exercise, it's a very active sense. You are to unwrap your gifts. I think some of us have these gifts that are kind of sitting under the tree and we just haven't touched them for a while. We may not have ever unwrapped them. There might still be a sense of mystery for us of, Lord, why am I here? What are my gifts? But it's this very active sense of employ them, use them, invest them, exercise them. And I think the implication as we get to this language around the manifold grace of God is that you are created in a particular way to kind of be that manifold vessel. There's meant to be lots of openings, lots of ways that you receive God's grace and express God's grace in the world. Each of you should exercise whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards. If somebody was to give you $1 million that you had to invest this year by blessing other people, and you knew that if you did that, you would get $2 million the following year and so on, I think a lot of us would be pretty intentional about how much fun would that be to bless. Well, the reality is we are sitting on treasure. We are vessels that are designed to carry God's grace, to be expressions of God's grace. And there's a little bit of a wordplay again in the Greek. The word grace is charis in Greek, and the word gifts is charisma or charismata, depending on whether you've got plural or not. And gift literally means grace things. Just all these grace things that you have in your life. And when you have somebody singing who has the gift of singing, it's a grace thing. When you have somebody who has these eyes that see you over a coffee and they see you, It's a grace thing. And one of the beautiful dynamics of grace is that when grace is shared, there's not less of it, there's more. So you might start out with 1 million grace things, and the more that they're shared, the more there is. And I think at times we do get worn down by the transactional nature of our world, where we're fearful of limits. Time and money are often almost enemies that we're seeking just to manage as best we can. And yet through the lens of grace, there is an abundance. It's manifold. So you and I get to be faithful stewards of God's manifold grace. God's manifold grace is being let loose all the time. And you and I become vessels where that can happen, where that can work. So I'm not going to say a lot about this poem. I will return to it next time I share here. But I wanted to just invite us to notice 3 aspects of the poem. And just to say that Kimberly Blaser, I think that's how you say her name, she's blessed our community by letting us use this poem for this purpose, and I thank her for that. She's actually a Native American, an Indigenous writer in the US. And I love the way that she has this kind of upside down, back to front way of seeing some things. Normally when we talk about bodies and we talk about leadership, we get very focused on the head. And it's kind of this top-down conversation. I love how she focuses on the feet. And there's a thread in here. It's just this recognition that we all have the same little bones in our foot. And they've got these funny names. And together they build something strong. And I hadn't really thought about my feet in this way before, but it turns out that 52 of your 206 bones are in your feet. More than a quarter. And none of them are very big. And yet somehow the arch in your foot carries all of your weight. And there's incredible strength there. There's incredible agility there. I just invite you for a moment to think about ballet dancers or athletes. And the grace, there's the word again, the grace of their movement. And what a gift it is to have healthy feet, and what a pain when you don't. And I know there's been some people in recent times who've had a bit of mischief and know the difference. And I love this little phrase, tiny but blessed cogs. That is you, my friend, a tiny blessed cog. You might feel small, but in God's world, in God's economy, you are worth so much. You are capable of so much when God's Spirit configures us, aligns us, helps us partner with our alongsiders, our little neighbours, who are also tiny but blessed cogs. As I have sat with this poem, I've had a wondering, and it's even stronger than a wondering now. There's almost a little bit of a sense of assurance about it, that I want to say this with a degree of confidence. I think we in this season are to become the feet of Christ. We are to become a community that is grounded. That's in touch with the reality that we find ourselves at Ringwood and beyond. That at our best we are to become beautifully aligned, tiny and blessed cogs, healthy feet that, yes, can stand, but also can move, can serve, can be quite dynamic. And I invite us into a wondering about that. Wonder what that might mean for us individually and collectively. And just allow this metaphor of feet to speak to you over some time. There's a key phrase that I also want to highlight. I don't think I even noticed it really the first time I read the poem, but it's there. It talks about finding healing, and it's interesting language, in the leaning. In the leaning. And I would say things like finding freedom in the leaning. I'm feeling incredibly privileged in this season, different people reaching out and sharing with me their journey and how God is inviting them. And there have been two particular messages that I've received this week that I get so excited by, but really touches me. They're tender messages. There's one of the more mature members of our community who has said, "John, I just sense this might be the last season of my life." And they use these words, "and I want to steward it well. I want to steward it well. And I want to steward it well in conversation with others." There it is. That's what it's about. And then another member of our community who has had to really lean and has said, "You know what, the way's still not clear. Lots of questions that aren't answered. But the fruit of trusting, the fruit of leaning is that," and these are their words, "I've never felt more free and I've never felt more at peace." And again, there it is. That's what this season is about. And I just want to encourage us that there are echoes of that I hear in lots of different conversations. And so, friends, we're leaning into a final song now, which is all about this posture. It's simply called "Here's My Heart, Lord." And it's basically a song that's inviting us to lean. To say, "Lord, I don't understand it all, I don't know it all, but I'm trusting you. I'm leaning into you now." So let's stand and sing that song together.